Fiat 500. Ah well, who cares? Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today, we're drawing a Fiat 500. That's right, the bane of every single line artist and illustrator and cartoonist's life. A car. I have never met an illustrator or a cartoonist who enjoys drawing cars. I do know a couple of 3D computer graphic illustrators who, honestly, that's what that kind of work is invented for, is making mechanical objects. I'm sure they love getting car jobs. That came out dirtier than I expected. But for the rest of us who have to try and make these three-dimensional, awkward, aquiline, and yet still boxy shapes using solely lines and tones, cars can be quite a nightmare. I think I've said before that, you try and draw a car, you have to get every line in exactly the right place, because the difference between one car brand and another car brand is often just a few inches worth of where the creases and folds and edges are. And when you shrink that down to a sheet of paper, that can turn into just millimeters worth of line, separating an accurately drawn car from an inaccurately drawn car. And most cars, I'll say, are common enough on the streets of America that people will be able to tell the difference. People have seen Fiats before in real life and in movies, which I'll get to. And if you draw a Fiat wrong, people will call you out on that and probably egg your house. Fortunately, like a couple of the other subcompact cars designed in the 60s, those designers in the 60s, they really knew their stuff. They wanted to make their cars look iconic. And that means that things like the Fiat 500, the Volkswagen Beetle, the Mini Cooper, they have extremely iconic designs. I believe the creator of the Fiat 500, the designer, it was created by Fiat, the company, but it was designed by Dante Giacosa. I think he got like some sort of international design award for the Fiat 500, which at the time was absolutely unheard of. They did not give design awards to automotive product designs. So, first for the Fiat 500 and Signor Giacosa. Also, it's worth mentioning that the iconic design of the Fiat 500 makes it a little bit easier to draw. You can screw up a little bit more and add a little bit more of your own character and flair and personality to the drawing before you lose brand recognition. I have never met an animal that likes to complain as much as our cat. It's like having, a Fox News viewer as a pet. It's kind of a surreal experience. I've sort of taken a cartoony approach to the Fiat, given him some curves and arched lines to suggest that Mr. Fiat is in motion there. Given this a little squash and stretch, which is an animation term for squashing and stretching the figure of an object in order to show movement, sort of exaggerates movement. And our human eye picks up on that very easily. It's a little shorthand. And it makes the job of all of us illustrators and artists just a little bit easier. There are a couple of details that really make the Fiat. One of them is the round headlights, and you've got the round turn signal lights, which is one of those design features that I personally very, very much miss. I don't know at what point every single car designer decided that cars need angry eyes, but I wholeheartedly disagree with that design decision, and I think it makes all modern cars a little bit uglier when they look like they're furrowing their brow. I'd like more cars to have big, round headlights. They made an update of the VW bus, the minibus, a few years ago. It looks like a loaf of bread, still. It always did. But the one thing that made the VW minibus iconic was those round headlights in front that made it look like it was kind of shocked to be on the road. It was pleasantly surprised. And they gave it rectangular angry eyes. So, another iconic piece of design down the toilet, because apparently Americans like to feel aggressive when they drive. It occurs to me that we could reverse engineer that and give every single car round eyes and maybe cut down on road rage. Who knows how much design influences behavior? I certainly do not, but given control over the entire Western economy, I would definitely give it a shot. All right, now the Fiat 500. Very iconic, award-winning design. Started production in 1957. Fiat as a car company, as an Italian car company, had been around for a couple of decades by that point. The Fiat 500, as we know it, isn't even the first Fiat 500. The first Fiat 500 was designed in 1938. It looks kind of like this, and it's known colloquially as the Topolino 500. After that, there was a Series 600 that looked almost the same as what I'm drawing, and then they made a new version of that called the Nuovo 500. And, there's the problem of naming your thing the new version, and it immediately becomes more popular than the old version. So now they've got a bunch of Fiat 500s and 600s. The 500s are still in production. The 600s, I don't think they lasted out the decade. I added a little more personality to my Fiat. Just because it's a wee little car, I thought it would be fun to show it as kind of a scrapper. It's got the bumper plate, the license plate, sort of hanging half off the bumper. It's got the trunk back there, which is actually where the engine sits. The cat doesn't like rear engine cars. He's got opinions about a lot of things. I'm sorry, that's just how they did it in the 60s. Fiat did it. Volkswagen did Volkswagen actually came first, designed their Beetle car in 1938. So this German car company couldn't actually start international production of the Beetle until 1945. And even then, it wasn't actually known as the Beetle until 1968. People were calling it the Beetle or the Volkswagen Bug long before that, but it took, over a decade for Volkswagen to catch up to popular demand and start actually branding their car as the Bug, the Beetle, the Punch Buggy. And then, to round it out, the Mini Cooper was developed in 1959 as just the Mini for its car company, whose name I forget, but in direct response to the Suez oil crisis. And for a while in the 60s, these tiny little subcompact cars were all the rage. Every single car company, it seems like, put out an adorable little subcompact car. But these three, I think, the Fiat 500, the Volkswagen Bug, and the Mini Cooper, are the ones that really stand out in people's minds, that are memorable. And you ask someone to envision the cutest, most adorable little car, chances are they're thinking of a Bug, a Fiat, or a Mini Cooper. And it's a little bit interesting, if you think about it this way, that they're all European cars. I guess America was a big enough country that their teeny-weeny, cute, adorable little cars never really took off in the same way. Whereas in Europe, you've got a bunch of extremely narrow roads that were invented for horse-drawn carriages and very cramped cities with streets and alleys roughly the size of two fat guys walking side by side. You need tiny cars, and people bought a heck of a lot of tiny cars in the 60s, and people still remember those tiny cars. At least, not in the least, because of, movies and popular culture. There was for the Mini Cooper, that movie, The Italian Job, and its remake, 4 decades later, The Italian Job, one starring Michael Caine, one starring Mark Wahlberg, unfortunately, in which, heisters and super thieves use Mini Coopers to zip through the streets of Italy, rob other gangsters of millions of dollars. Very nice. Very iconic movie. The Volkswagen Bug, obviously. Most recently, you have Bumblebee of the Transformers. He turns into a Volkswagen Bug. But even before that, you had Herbie the Love Bug. And I'm sure there are other, movies where a pint-sized character is given a bug in order to emphasize some character trait, where a character is given a Volkswagen Beetle in order to emphasize some sort of adorable or small or, pint-sized, but watch out sort of character trait. And the Fiat 500, most recently, the Fiat 500 was in Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, Part 1, in which Tom Cruise and Haley Atwell, I think, are running from the cops, and they hop in a vintage Fiat 500, a nice lemon yellow color. Their version is electric, but that would have been probably retrofitted. Or maybe it's just a detail that's mentioned in the movie. And they bounce around the streets of Rome trying to get away from the bad guys, using the Fiat's small size to drive down stairways and through alleys and parks and stuff. I think at some point they hop onto train tracks. Ah, well, who cares? But the very fact that they're using a Fiat 500, I feel like is a direct homage to an earlier Japanese anime, also about extremely cool people on the run from the law. Lupin III, created by Monkey Punch and animated by a whole bunch of different studios. It's a long-running series. It's been around since, I think, the 70s. Lupin's iconic getaway car of choice is a Fiat 500. And in fact, its first appearance was in Hayao Miyazaki's first movie, Lupin and the Castle of Cagliostro, in which he spends the first part of the movie driving a bright yellow Fiat 500. And he uses that to save a princess during a car crash, car chase, and, gets away from the bad guys at the end of the movie in the same car, even though by that point it's extremely busted up, more busted up than I'm drawing my version. But if you know a Fiat 500 from popular culture, chances are it's probably from the Lupin franchise. Lupin. It's a Japanese anime about a French thief driving an Italian car. Who says multinationalism isn't a good thing? Now me with my brush pen, I'm slightly disappointed in how I'm handling all these arcs and curves, especially since even me doing a cartoony version, the arcs and curves are still important in giving the vehicle a sense of movement. But this is largely due to me, to my camera, not being connected to the sketchbook. So if I want to turn the sketchbook around, that shows up on camera. It's not the coolest thing in the world. It's not the nicest look. And I've got two cameras, as you may have seen, so I've got to adjust both of them every time I shuffle around my my sketchbook. It's a little bit of a pain in the keister. So, for the sake of this one sketchbook page, I'm sacrificing some of the quality of my line work in order to maintain a good video. Doing a little dry brush technique for the shadow down there. This is why I like to keep my old brush pens. When they're just about out of ink, they're not too useful anymore for actually drawing, but they are very useful for doing dry brush, which new brush pens are not good for. Their brushes are all too wet. And there isn't an artist that I know who doesn't have a few too many art supplies. And It's the rare artist who uses all of their art supplies every day. So I've got a whole bunch of these colored pencils, Prismacolors. It's a very good brand. But I never used them. And given that I'm sort of hunting for a new style right now, I thought I'd give them a go, see how I like the feel of them, see if I've still got my colored pencil chops that I picked up in art school. I don't think it should be. It's not too labor intensive. I like colored pencils because they don't smear in the same way that wet ink smears, paint smears, pencils smear. But pencils and colored pencils are completely different animals. The only thing they have in common is that the mark making bit is wrapped in wood. But regular pencils, they use graphite, which is a mineral, a rock, ground up and mixed with clay. The clay is how it sticks to the paper. The graphite on its own is a very slippery material. You put a mark of graphite on a sheet of paper, you can rub it off with your finger. It's got to have the clay on it to make it stick to the paper. But colored pencils, they don't have any minerals in them. They're made of pigment, which is, chemical pigment is what colors are. Every kind of ink, every kind of printing technology, they're using some form of pigment mixed with something else to adhere to the paper or the plastic or the metal or whatever. Colored pencils mix their pigments with wax and also some sort of fatty acid in order to adhere the pigment and the wax together. And the more expensive basically your colored pencil, the more pigment they put in it as opposed to just the filler. And if you're thinking to yourself, wax, isn't that what crayons are made of too? You're correct. The difference between a colored pencil and a crayon is basically just skinniness, and also the fact that there's way more wax in the kind of Crayola crayons that you get at Walmart than in any sort of colored pencil. You have to really lay down some crayon to get the same density of color that you would from a colored pencil. But, the point of both crayons and colored pencils is that the texture of a paper, if you plan to use these materials, the texture of the paper allows a little bit of the whiteness of the paper to show through. And you really need to really use layers of color if that's not what you want. Or ideally, you put down a surface of some sort of paint ahead of time. And that way you can use the colored pencils just for detailing, which is what they're extremely good at. Colored pencils, I find, aren't that great for broad swaths of color like I'm doing here. Regardless, I thought I'd check them out. You have to be super meticulous, though, in order to make everything look flat. Otherwise, you get to see the back and forth motion of your hand really easily in the mark making. A good way to prevent that, however, is to use those tiny little circles. It takes longer, but as you may have noticed with art, the longer something takes, the better it's probably going to look. I'm trying to keep this around half an hour. So it's going to look a half hour's worth of good. And you can see here where I'm using, layers of the yellow and the orange to build up pigment on the paper. On the one thing with cars, coloring cars is interesting because car manufacturers put a lot of time and effort into making their cars look a specific way. Multiple layers of like primer and paint and protective coating in order to give it that shiny gloss car finish. And that's if they don't have like that metallic sort of glittery sparkle that some very fancy old cars used to have. Not so much the new cars, although when we were car shopping a few years ago looking for a nice Toyota, they did have a midnight blue, a midnight colored Prius that was sort of shimmery and prismatic purple. I thought it looked really cool, but it also did not have nearly enough headroom or storage space in the trunk for our needs. So no midnight Prius for us. Also, you have a dark purple car. It's going to be hot as the dickens in the summer, and I live in DC, where it can get up to triple digits if the wind isn't with us. You may also notice this technique I'm doing where I'm putting all the shadows. I'm using orange for the shadows. And I'm placing those shadows directly next to the highlights, which I'm leaving white. This is a neat little sort of counterintuitive trick. I'm not using any specific lighting, directional lighting for this car. Maybe you can tell. But you can make things look metallic by putting the shadow right next to the highlight, because the highlight is where the light is shining directly on it. And what do you call the spot where the light isn't shining? Shadow. Instead, it's reflecting stuff. So the orange is, your brain reads the orange as sort of reflecting various other parts of the car, various other surroundings, which sort of fade away. And then you see the yellow, which is the color that the car is. And in that way, it's just a little trick to make something appear a little more realistic. Because you do see this in real life. But I don't have a reference. And I'm not using directional lighting. Even given that, your brain reads this sort of lighting as being kind of metallic, which is good. That's what we're going for. Building up the layers, colored pencil. You have the orange, you put the yellow on top of that. It fills in just a little more of the space where the orange didn't reach. Covers a little bit more of the paper, and it sort of smears the lower layers so it all blends together. I think they have colored pencils that are specifically for blending. I've never used them myself. I feel like they just end up layering the entire piece with a coating of wax that is hard to deal with if you want to make any further adjustments with a colored pencil. The other thing I don't particularly enjoy about colored pencils is that you can't really work on top of them. That wax is not water soluble. which means that if you're painting on top of that, the paint is sort of just going to bead up. It's not going to give you a nice smooth surface. Colored pencils are a final material, I'd say. You can use them on top of paint. You can't use paint on top of colored pencil, unless you're using something like acrylic or oil paints. Those are sturdy enough that you can slap them on anything, but they won't really stick as well to colored pencil as they would to a primed canvas or a piece of illustration board, or heck, even just plain paper. Maybe at a later date I'll try it out where I use some colored pencils on top of watercolor. That can give you a really nice effect. You can get watercolors, acrylics to blend really nicely with each other, and then you dive in with the colored pencil to touch up the details. You can get some amazing volumetrics out of that. Just an immense variation with your darks and lights. And since it's 3 different mediums, it sort of boggles the viewer into just accepting the piece as a whole, other than saying, oh, that's a nice watercolor, or, oh, that's a nice colored pencil. It's multiple media. So, mixed media. It can be very effective and very fun. And, you know, on some level, that kind of art is dying out as it becomes more economical to just do everything digitally. On that, I will not deny. I'm coloring in the silver and the black and white using my Blackwing pencil. This is a very high quality graphite pencil. Very little clay in this. Get a very good dark line. Am I saying very too much? I like the word very, but I think it stands up to the colored pencil in terms of quality. I actually kind of like the way that the purely gray graphite contrasts with the colored pencil. It's not like I don't have other colors in my colored pencil set I could have used. And, you know, if I was doing realistic coloring in the same way that I was doing realistic coloring on the body of the car, as I am for the chrome of the car, I would have chosen a warm color, probably a umber or an ochre, and a cool color. Sort of blended those together in order to get a gentle neutral color that I could fluctuate across the various bumpers and hubcaps and stuff. But, you know, sometimes in these car illustrations that you see in magazines or production photos, they are using graphite in those for a specific look, and that's kind of what I wanted to go for too. Not all of my creative decisions are based on laziness. If I were doing my due diligence, you know, I'd color those turn signals orange for the Fiat logo in the middle there. Throw a little red on that. But, you know, I ain't got time for that today. And that's the Fiat Nuovo 500. If you liked this video, click the like button. If you like this channel, click the subscribe button. Get updated whenever new videos drop. by clicking the bell icon. And if you want to see these videos early, you can click on my Patreon. If you just appreciate this sort of content enough to throw a few dollars my way, I've got a Ko-Fi and a TeePublic. Links in the description. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like me to draw next, drop a comment below. So, until next time, stay sketching, stay legendary, and have a nice day.